Well, welcome everyone. Sorry we're running a tiny bit late here, but we've got everyone gathered for our great webinar session today. I want to really thank you for coming to the second episode in our webinar series. Today's webinar is called Decolonizing the Land and Food System, Indigenous Resilience in Times of Crisis. My name is Claire Cullen and I'm the Operations Director at the Center for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I also would like to acknowledge that many of you are joining us today from many places, near and far, and acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. I would encourage everyone to take a moment and situate yourselves in place. Think about whose territory you are currently residing, and how are you accountable to the people of those lands? Today is our second installment in our webinar series, Building a Resilient Food System During COVID-19 and Beyond. This series is brought to you by the Center for Sustainable Food Systems, the BC Food Web, and the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. The Center for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm is a teaching and research center, as well as a local to global food hub, working towards a more sustainable, food secure future. Our mission is to innovate from field to fork to achieve resilient, thriving, and socially just food systems for all. BC Food Web is a web portal project which aims to increase access and connection to current research and other resource materials. In addition, it aims to encourage innovation between farmers and researchers for future project collaborations. The Faculty of Land and Food Systems is a world leader in integrated research, education, and service at UBC. The faculty aims to address critical global issues around human health and a sustainable food supply. So before I hand things over to our witness, Angela McIntyre, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping notes with you. If you would like to submit questions during this webinar, you can do so by writing them in the Q&A function in Zoom. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoom now, but for those of you who are not, you will find this function, the Q&A function, at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Within the Q&A function, you can upvote questions that resonate with you. So please feel free to upvote or like other people's questions. You'll notice that the chat function is disabled for this webinar. This is done at the request of our witness and in keeping with protocol to enable our audience to give their full attention to our guest speakers today. In that vein, I'd like you to take a moment and do the things that you need to do to make sure you can be fully present with us for the next hour or so. If you have other tabs open on your computer or device, you might want to close them. If you have your phone close by, maybe turn it off, turn the ringer off. If you need to get water, please go and get some now. Just do whatever you need to give your full attention to this space. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to pass this over to Angela McIntyre. Angela, I think you're muted, my dear.
Off to a good start, leaving my mute button on. My name is Angela McIntyre. I come from Scottish, German, and Cree heritage. I'm a guest here on Salt Spring Island, which is the traditional territory of the Songhees, Cowichan, Wasanic, and people. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. I've never witnessed before. So let me just explain a little bit to you what my role is here. I've had to research this book a little bit because I've seen witnessing done before, but I've never actually done it. And so, and in this interesting context of a webinar where we're not all in the same room together, it poses some challenges. I guess the first thing to say is that being called to witness in the Coast Salish and Interior Salish people's tradition, it's a huge honor, it dates back before European contact, and it's important to oral cultures who rely on oral history for the transmission of their knowledge. And the role of a witness is to record the message of this event in their hearts and minds, and afterward to remember and validate the occasion by carrying the message forward and sharing it everywhere we possibly can. Having said that, this is in no way intended to replicate the tradition itself. This is an adaptation. I also reflected a little bit on what my role is as an Indigenous scholar in witnessing. And I think that one of the things that I'm tasked to do as an academic working in these institutions is to work from the inside to break down some of the barriers and challenge the inherent racism in a system that has been very complicit in the reproduction of colonization, in its exclusion of Indigenous knowledge. And to try and help to confront some of the barriers that have for many years left Indigenous peoples waiting at the door of academic institutions. So these are some of the things that I've reflected on that may be part of my role as an Indigenous scholar and a witness to these teachings that we're going to receive today. So we're going to move through the speakers, and at the end of that, I will try and summarize what I receive to be the most important parts of these teachings in a way that enables them to be passed along to generations. It's a really important responsibility, and I'm very nervous about it. I'm going to try and do it without taking any notes to stay true to the oral tradition. And I think with that, I will turn the screen over to my colleagues and allow them to introduce themselves. Oh, I wonder if first, is there somebody who would be able to offer a prayer to open the occasion in the right way? Dawn, I'm looking at you. Would you honor us? You're muted. You're muted, Dawn.
Okay, there we go. I made the same mistake. So yeah, if there's nobody else within the circle stepping forward, I'd be honored to do that. And so it is a huge honor because it's important that from an Indigenous way of knowing and researching, ceremony is important, ritual is important, intention setting is important. So I'm happy to do that here today. And as a woman from the Interior Salish tribe of the Secwepemc, I am not Coast Salish, but I am Interior Salish, and our ancestors share common root words in our languages, and kinship ties and traditional trade relations. We once shared one of the largest subsistence economies that existed on the planet. When you look at the size of Salish territory, that spans all the way from the Rocky Mountains to the Salish Seas. And so in that spirit, I will say a prayer and just ask that we all start off with taking a couple of changing breaths, because I think it's important that we don't pray in a rote way. I think we need to bring some mindfulness into the words and the resonance of the words that I'll share, just to start us off that way. So a couple of deep breaths, and close your eyes. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. One more time. Cook's Jam, Great Spirit, to Kalkukpi, for this beautiful day, this beautiful moment in time, for all of the great teachings, the ancient protocols and practices and ritual that live within our ancestral memories of Indigenous people and people all over the world who are coming to realize ourselves more fully. In the challenges and the rewards that come with those challenges, to do this deep and meaningful work, to remember ourselves, to reconnect to our ancestral wisdom and ways of knowing in this work. Thank you for your guidance. You're the only one that knows it all, Great Spirit. Guide us in the most compassionate, courageous, and loving ways to speak our truth, and help us to realize ourselves as better human beings. Thank you for the food that gave us the energy and is helping us to transform our words and our thoughts into a living reality that will help Indigenous people and all of the people who are living in the most food insecurity to find a way to respond to their own needs and to find the support they need to do that. Cook's Jam to the Huamasquiam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish, and their ancestors who are ultimately guiding us here today on their beautiful lands and waters. May we do justice to their generous hospitality and have our work benefit them in the highest way. All my relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. So I guess without further ado, we can go ahead with our first speaker. I won't do this sort of usual academic thing of reading off everyone's bios. I think I'll just give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, if that's okay. Okay.
I think I'm supposed to go first.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, I'm just, Michael, can you pull up my slides?
Mm-hmm.
So while we wait for the slides, I'll just, I will just say that I am, as a Secwepemc woman that I mentioned in the prayer, I'm here living back and forth, traveling back and forth like my ancestors would have done between Interior and Coast Salish territory. And I'm currently, I'm in my home in the Coast Salish territory, and to acknowledge that. And I hope that the Coast Salish people watching here today will see the benefit in my work and will guide me in the future and ensuring that my work is actually benefiting the people here. And so thank you for having me again. Now I'm just, if we could go to the next slide. I just wanted to, acknowledge again the territories. We're here on the Huamasquiam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories, and I am specifically from a community, Skatzin is the traditional name, but it's known as the Nisconluth Indian Reserve in a watershed known as Chistelanetkwa, and our neighboring community between the Skatzin, the Chistelanetkwa, is the Squilax, the Little Shuswap Indian Reserve. And we are on the shores of the South Thompson River, which in our culture and our language we call Shekwatmuk Setkwa. Next slide, please. So the presentation, I'm just going to give you an overview of our work as the founder and curator of the research and relationships for the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty. My presentation and my talk will be to give you an overview of our work and our projects, but also to get into some of the aspects of decolonizing the land and food system that we're doing, especially in the present day reality with the COVID and climate crisis that we've been working in the intersectionalities of how Indigenous food sovereignty is a framework for appreciating and inquiring into the characteristics of strength and resiliency in times of crisis. So those are some photos taken here in Coast Salish territory to give you an example of some of the beautiful Coast Salish men and women in the picture on the left who have guided us in our work and taught us. Art, Leon Alana's partner, Eddie Gardner from the Squaw First Nation in the Upper Fraser Valley, Dorothy Christian from my home territory, my mother, Bernice August, Yvette John from the Stalo, and Sharon Jingerson Brass, a beautiful elder with the Pacific Association of First Nations Women who works with Indigenous women in the downtown east side. And the picture on the right is the Wild Salmon Caravan. Just to give you an idea of the amount of people that have shown up to respond to our work in such beautiful cultural expressions of love for wild salmon. Next slide. So again, the Wild Salmon Caravan is one of our projects. It's a celebration of the spirit of wild salmon. And we revitalize intertribal networks where the strength of Indigenous fisheries knowledge lives to advocate for the conservation of wild salmon and their habitat. We see our wild salmon, our most important Indigenous food and cultural and ecological keystone species, dwindling to literally hundreds when they once traveled and migrated in the millions to all of the people on the Fraser Basin and to the 5 major river systems throughout so-called BC. Wild salmon is very important, and we're in a very serious crisis in terms of the loss of this species. So we really need to mobilize and engage people through the arts and the culture in this public education campaign. Next slide, please. So that's speaking more. It's a beautiful picture of some of the wild salmon coming home to spawn in the Adams River in my home territory. Next slide. Another one of our projects is the Indigenous Food and Freedom School. It's our most recent project, and it's based on the last 15 years of mobilizing knowledge and networks and gathering input and being entrusted with sophisticated Indigenous knowledge and strategies that is based on an emancipatory model of learning, the way that we as Indigenous peoples know in a transformative pedagogy and coming together in our collective right mind to appreciate all the gifts and knowledge that our cohorts, we've got 2 cohorts that we've recruited, one here in the east side of Vancouver, where we were awarded a residency in the Strathcona Park by the Vancouver Parks Board, who's recently accepted our vision to restore Indigenous foodlands in the park and is putting it into their capital planning budget for 2022 to 2026. And that park has an amazing, rich history of social justice. So bringing an Indigenous food sovereignty lens into that neighborhood is going to be fun. As a Interior Salish woman and not being a Coast Salish myself, our working group on Indigenous food sovereignty really just sees ourselves observing the Coast Salish protocol and serving in an intermediary role for the Coast Salish whose land it really is. So how it will be a good experience for us to facilitate the vision, the realization of this vision, which is really in a way giving the land back to the Coast Salish and the knowledge that will be needed to restore Indigenous foodlands is really their project. Is just us showing up to figure out how to be there in that space in an emancipatory, liberating way. We're also mapping out or proposing to map out and advocate for Secwepemc Foodlands Conservation Area in my home territory, in the Secwepemc. Next slide, please. So that's just a bit more about the Indigenous Food and Freedom School. Next slide. So yeah, we've been really engaging and going out into our extended networks there's a beautiful movement of mutual aid and solidarity happening around the world as part of, I mean, it was happening before COVID, but I think with COVID, it's been, I guess the fire's been lit and there's been a lot more action from within the global networks of mutual aid who are developing financial, legal, and technical tools to mobilize away from capitalism into a new type of economy based on solidarity, mutual aid, and for Indigenous peoples, our subsistence economy of giving, sharing, and trading is really the oldest living memory of what it means to live in a sustainable economy. And so we have Indigenous peoples in the Vancouver area who have really migrated from all over Canada, but also all over the world. And so we're looking forward to the opportunity to mobilize more specifically with people of all colors, which are known as the Rainbow Coalitions. And of course, our showing way and power. And next slide. No problem. Oh, I see. Looking at, so Indigenous food sovereign policy approach, policy planning and governance approach to addressing the underlying issues of why Indigenous peoples don't have enough food. We live in fourth world realities, meaning third world conditions within a first world. There's huge disparity. We're over food insecure, poverty-stricken neighborhood. And we have land culturally competent and security for that matter. His favor is set up the wealthiest of the wealthiest population, consolidating infrastructure needed for and food procurement. Species and the impacts of climate's missed in the environment. And as you know, we're hearing a lot about structural racism in the justice system, but for us, the Western science-based techno-bureaucratic framework for accounting and for administration is really kind of a multi-layered challenge for us to not only educate the world and be on the front line of many of the social and environmental injustices, but also to navigate a bureaucratic system and a Western science methodology that is very limited in its reductionist mindset and its ability to work within the complexity of a holistic health regenerative narrative. Next slide, please. So this is giving some important facts, and I know I realize that I always go over time, and I know I'm getting the warnings now. I'm a little bit I don't want to take up all the other time from the other speakers. I might go over a little bit, but I'll try to get through as much as I can. This slide here we will give to everybody. I won't go through bullet by bullet, but I do want to say that Indigenous peoples play a significant role in conserving the biodiversity and the cultural heritage of humanity. We have made major contributions to the land and food systems in terms of heritage seeds, in terms of land, in terms of knowledge. And I think that really the issues at large is the social justice issues, because it's human behavior that is the biggest factor impacting health and well-being of the land and food system. So that's really a policy problem. Next slide, please. So in order to decolonize the land and food system, we need to reconcile, well, I think what needs to happen is that the racist narratives and systems of administration, of accounting, of research, of policy, planning, and governance, there needs to be a lot of dismantling of the structures and processes that perpetuate racist narratives, and also serve to balance or transcend the binary thinking and balance out the imbalances in privilege and power, and looking at financial, technical, and human tools and support to do that. So next slide, please. So we need a just transition to a regenerative tribal economy, and we can do that. I think Indigenous food sovereignty offers some core principles, paradigms, practices, and protocols, and we need to transition out of a productionist mindset. Next slide, please. So again, I'm not going to go through this, but we have developed a cross-cultural interface framework. It's a transformative, based on a transformative pedagogy and an Indigenous way of knowing. And so this is something that I would ask that it only be used if it's an Indigenous person contextualizing it within a specific situation or issue, because it's quite complex and it's not meant to be definitive. It's meant to be a tool for creating structure and cultural safety in cross-cultural discourse. Next slide. And okay, I've gone through that. Next slide. And that just kind of goes a little bit further into the framework. And again, I don't want to take up too much more time, so we'll skip over this. And to say thank you, follow the leadership of the matriarchs. This is a beautiful photo of some of the women, Indigenous women, very strong women doing amazing work. And I call on all people of all colors to get behind the women, the matriarchs. It's a different ethic in governing, a different way of governing. It's grandmother's law, and it's very different from the patriarchal system of governance. And we need to strengthen the voices of the women and the children, the grandmothers, the ones with the values that are more about taking care of and feeding the people rather than being motivated by profit and global export for trade. So again, thank you so much. And I'm really sorry about this going through that so quickly. But there it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was really amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think our next speaker is Wilson, correct? Yes. Oh, is Alana next? I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Sorry, Alana. It's you. Yeah, please. The screen is yours.
Pujanindaway Maganidag Magakaka Ninamika Indishnakas. I'm Miskin Dodam Anishana Bimidekwe Pegwastonshaba. Ichiwile, Alana Anta. Thank you, Dawn, and for the center there for inviting us to come and speak, and most humble appreciations for the teachers and leaders and artists who are from the Coast Salish, Homakwiyam, and sister host nations that Dawn already has acknowledged. And so let's say I come from Treaty 1 and Treaty 5, so that's in Manitoba, and I've been an uninvited guest here since 1990. And although I am married into Sta'alis, I always use my privilege of my graduate work and my positionality and probably even the color of my skin to make space to facilitate relationships to local communities in the context of resistance, and also holding the space for regenerative practices as well, and processes that need to accompany that. I did my graduate work back home, working with land-based health education programs, and we developed a 5-point pedagogy for my PhD. And then from there, we worked with Medicine Collective, a group of Indigenous knowledge holders and researchers with the, back then it was the Institute of Aboriginal Health in the early 90s. And then with Dr. Eduardo Jovel with the Indigenous Research Partnerships, and looked at how do we develop these protocols together as a teaching team to demonstrate trans-cultural ways of relating to the land, and working from a kind of a intergenerational knowledge transmission and mobilization to connect people back to the earth in order to have holistic health. And so the postdoc work with the center looked at interviewing local people who have interacted with the 4 Indigenous gardens at the UBC Farm South campus, and then also interviewed others who are doing land-based initiatives locally, or sort of like regionally, and then within the province. And we developed 5 main points that kind of looked at the Haggie's and Donatello's work around, maybe you can pull up that slide, that look at health indicators and overall wellness. And so I think we're, how do we live as nation to nation good relatives, right? Those are our kind of plain speak. How do we engage in reciprocal relations? And I think we need to move to the diagram one there, Mike. Yeah, so moving from, so here are the, sorry. There's our garden there. It's based on a spindle whorl design in collaboration with Humascan people and across different faculties. It's the whole ecology one, Mike. So there's my findings from the urban, the rural. It's the one with the whole ecology, Mike. So here we are. So basically, Donatello's longitudinal study worked with the Swinomish group, and our findings, based on talking with 28 participants, are very similar to his work. It's his cross-border work. Resiliency, natural resource security, cultural use, self-determination for sure, as a way to respond as a responsible nation to nations relationships. So again, as facilitator of relationships and figuring out, like Dawn says, how do we not get in the way? And how do we use our power and privilege to help self-determination of peoples? Because in Humasquiam, there's this Barron and Guerin case that, basically they're getting their land back. So, it's not that they want to kick people out, but how do we maintain good relationships that's not going to continue to hurt the economies or the ecologies. So education, health are some of the other findings. Let's see, can you move a couple of slides back? Not that. Oh yeah, so I might as well talk about, oh yeah, okay, so this is, sorry about that. I should have did it myself. So the Indigenous research partnerships, working with local elders here, you see them, Larry and Shane, who have intersected with many of the garden initiatives. And some of the sort of land-based approaches, the pedagogies that are featured in those spaces are around cultural workings with the forest or with cedar. And so many different disciplines across the campus have intersected with the space there, and the sort of cultivation of place has a document for the center, and then there's a parallel document that the Indigenous Gardens kind of move also with. The short name is Gantek, but it was by Richardson. And so looking at how do we reflect appropriately, what are the processes and protocols that we need to develop there. And so as a result of some of the findings, it's like, well, gardens or food production isn't the whole thing, because that only develops a certain part of the community. And so how are we going to work with people's interests? And so the work with artists and capitalizing, I guess, or maybe that's not the right word, but making space for local interests and how that gets expressed in land-based settings. So I was so shocked to find out, and maybe not so shocked, that all of the salmon spawning streams, there's only one left, and so we have to look beyond kind of the way that food production is being looked at and taught, and so based on UNDRIP, the TRC principles, which also works with UNDRIP, what are the ways that we are making spaces welcoming to those communities? And there are a number of, like SCARPs did some really interesting work that worked with Musqueam to look at their community development plans and to get on board, basically to do the homework of like figuring out how to work with what they're already doing there. And then, of course, the education models around massive online MOOC trainings for reconciliation. That seems like it's a really useful model for getting organizations and faculties to all be required to take things like that, and social justice, and to be given credit for doing that and time to do that, because everybody needs to be speaking a similar language in order to kind of move forward in a good way. And it doesn't fall on Indigenous peoples. It becomes the organization's long-term or the strategic plan in the UBC case. And so I put some of those links on this PowerPoint to help people kind of navigate my thinking here. Where's my time? So the SSHRC funded postdoc and also my graduate work, really the findings there are, let's see, can you find that for me there, Mike? I'll let you know when we get to it. There. Oh, too much. One back. There, so governance. So we need to have land stewardship protocols, all the things that Dawn had already mentioned, and then that beautiful Donatuo and Hegi, health indicators for urban and then Coast Salish. Education, we need to have decolonized education, holistic health approaches, and to focus on resiliency and to expect to have alternative that doesn't fit and to become complicit. Some of the words are like allyship, and really it needs to move a little bit beyond to complicity. And so when I teach Indigenous methodologies, and who are the education faculty is partnering with different communities to look at, well, how do we do that? How do we get into the schools? How do we get into whatever spheres of influence that people have in order to make that change? Because we're not speaking the same language. So there needs to be time, and especially, you know, if in this situation where the strategic plan is saying, be prepared to talk on the world stage, I don't think most of our graduates are anywhere near that. And so that bar really needs benchmarks from multiple places. I think that's about it for me. Am I on time? 1 minute warning. Yay! Up to you, Wilson. Chimigwech, on my relation, hike chapsa.
Thank you, Alana. Okay, Wilson, you're up.
Right on. Thanks, Alana, and thank you, Dawn and Angela for holding the space, and also for the center for putting it together. So it's really good to actually have the opportunity to share some of the things we are doing together, and some of the racial inequalities and many other things the social justice movement that we are tackling with all our projects. So I'm going to be brief because we don't have a lot of time. So we are under the tick-tock colonial clock, and it's often like that. We only have this amount of time to kind of get together and talk, and I think is one of the biggest challenges to create space for us to really have that conversation. 10 minutes will not cut it, but I will do my best to kind of just position myself here in the things that I'd like to share with you today. So before I go ahead, also I want to say that I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be here on this beautiful land of the Musqueam people. I'm also an invited visitor here. I come from a mixed background. I'm Terena, Guarani, Kaiowá, Mozambican, and Portuguese, so-called Brazil. So I've been away from home for quite some time and been living in someone else's land. And then I want to resonate with Alana has said earlier about my responsibility as a visitor in somebody else's land. And so the way in which I'm showing up to this work is to engage in these conversations and help as much as I can. So I'm in this 10 minutes that I have with you here, 9 minutes, I just want to position myself with the 2 baskets that I'm carrying. So here, I work with the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty. I work with Dawn, and I'm the Chief and Media Director for the Working Group on Indigenous Food Sovereignty. I've been part of the working group for quite some time, and I've been, supported as much as I can, given that I'm also at UBC finishing up my PhD and leading the Watsitsum Garden. I've been the coordinator from that space for quite some time, and working with Alana here and Eduardo Hovel, Dr. Eduardo Hovel, on this shirk that Alana has actually mentioned. And also my PhD is a part of that work. And so I'm hoping that in this 10 minutes here, I want to just highlight some of that work and how that's related to this conversation and the conversation of decolonizing the food systems. And for me, what resonates for me is that I think the equation here is simple. Land is life, land or food comes from the land. And then if that access to that beautiful land, that provides us food, medicine, for us to keep living, be with each other, is not present, that there is a problem. And so I don't want to go into the negative spaces and provide you with a lot of data out there saying, people of color, Indigenous people, Black folks are outside of the system, the food system, because we are not having our voice in there. So we appreciate being part of those projects, following Dawn's leadership in here, because I think that's a good example of how we can recreate and then enter this conversation of decolonize the food system that have been set up by the colonial government for a long time. And so similarly with the Watsitsum Garden, and the way in which we are, Alana mentioned, creating relationships and honoring the place we are by strengthening our relationships with the local folks. And so with this COVID-19 and George Floyd death, and I agreed on, I think it's the momentum that it lit this fire that got us into the spotlight, to talk about, the trauma that the system has caused for a long time, and people had enough of it. We have enough of it. I had enough of it. And so being an academic and also being involved in community work, it's a very interesting place to be. So this time and age, I think we, open up this conversation about, what are we going to do? What the white folks out there can do to actually join this movement, And it's not a place to be guilty, because there's no place for guilt here. We just have to actually figure out how we move together. So one way I could actually, I've been thinking about, and is actually part of work, if you look at on a global level, on a like a global policy, for example, or a framework, is the UNDREP, as Alana has mentioned, and the TRC. And so I think it's like, before we move into, creating policies, we have to look what we have been working on for quite some time. So 2007, we've been working on the UNDREP for so long, and it's a comprehensive body of work that we have already a framework. So whether or not Canada has actually signed in, to be part of this process of decolonization, we actually haven't done. The Canadian government, neither UBC, to be honest with you, have not followed up with actions. It's actually on us. So what Watsitsum Garden and the work that the Working Group Indigenous Food Sovereignty is doing is actually addressing exactly what a lot of those articles that has been outlined on the UNDREP, as well as the TRC. And so it's still on us to actually take that on and just carry on and have to face all this the colonial policies that is actually impacting our lives, in our daily lives. So my research is connected with Alana was saying about the shirk. So while I was supporting Alana in terms of having the interviews and with like the provincial, we are connected with folks, indigenous folks doing indigenous food sovereignty, food security work in the province. My work has been strictly looking at indigenous youth at indigenous programming at the UBC farm. And so while there is, I have a preliminary data of that, what has been clear to me is that they are saying, hey, look, you know, this is not, this sort of space, you know, culturally relevant spaces with elders in it, with children in it, is the place that we can actually heal, the place that we can actually find ourselves as identity, you know, that we can probably move forward in terms of challenging our governments about the policies that we want to see in their food systems. So there's a lot there, but I just want to highlight some of those issues. You know, there's another part of it, which is this conversation on the divide, the dualistic view of like food systems in the countryside and food systems in the city. People, I mean, there is definitely a difference in there, but we must start engaging with this, you know, this kind of divide view of the food system, how we actually facing challenges, given our realities as indigenous people, whether from all around Toro Island, you know, and I have to say, and most of us are in the cities and urban. Does that mean that, so we needed to be part of that transformation? We need to be part of the policy making. We needed to be, you know, creating more spaces for us to actually have a voice and interact and doing things together. And so I'm going to stop here. So I got a 2 minutes warning. Thank you so much for hosting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wilson. Wow. Okay. You know, witnessing is really hard. I fell back into my pattern of frantically taking notes and preparing to repeat them back to you. I'm going to try not to do that. I may look at my, but before I speak to you as a witness, I want to share something with you. It's written by Mohawk scholar Stephen Kopti, and it's about witnessing and Indigenous scholars and our role in witnessing. And he says, Indigenous scholars are being called to witness 7 generations forward and to preserve the beauty and strength our ancestors wanted to protect. Our ancestors sacrificed a great deal, and we must wipe our tears, our eyes, listen deeply, clear our throats, and raise our strong voices to bear witness to our ancestors. So with those words, I'm asking that you all help me in this work of witnessing, because it's a really big job. And I think all of our presenters actually highlighted the fact that we all have a role in this job, in going forward and taking this knowledge and keeping it alive, no matter who we are. Indigenous people the world over, it doesn't matter what our skin color is. We all have a role in this. Dawn, the salmon caravan, there's celebration in this work, and the salmon caravan is such a beautiful example of that. There's celebration, there's sorrow, but there's celebration. It's serious work, but there's also celebration. And it reminds me, it makes me think of the joy and the celebrations that people must have felt in seeing those pre-colonial, that in experiencing that abundance, the salmon spawns, the herring runs, the migrations of caribou, the joy in that. We need that joy back. We want that joy back. And I think we all hold that in our hearts. We hold that in our hearts as an aspiration. John, you also talked about how everyone, whether Indigenous or otherwise, whether we work with these or against these techno-bureaucratic frameworks that reproduce injustices, we all have some power and some capacity and capability to change things regardless of where we are. So from wherever we sit, we have some power, and we need to recognize that and use it. Alana, land-based health and healing. I especially love this subject, and that diagram of the Donatuo's indicators diagram. I go back to that time and time again, over and over and over again, because to me it really encapsulates something that I call it the spirit to spreadsheet dilemma. How do we express, how do we describe and document and express and communicate the processes, healing processes across cultures? Because it's important, and we who work as scholars, as health workers, whatever it is that we do, we live in these two worlds, and so we need to become fluent in these languages. And I think what you said about preparing us to be able to have our voices heard and to be able to speak on global stages, that really struck me as incredibly important. You also talked about, you mentioned UNDRIP and the importance of bringing reconciliation into reality. And that reminded me of something that I hear expressed over and over again, which is that UNDRIP is the floor, it's not the ceiling. And from that floor, we have a lot of building, we have a lot of regeneration and a lot of work to do, but that's the floor, not the ceiling. Wilson, land is life. And this, I think, ties back to the idea that without land-based self-determination, we can't do the work that we need to do. You also very fleetingly, you used the word data, and you said, I'm not going to talk about the problems. And I think this is a really important point, because Western science, the collection of data and statistics, reveals these broad patterns of deficits that can only really invite colonial solutions that reproduce colonial violence. When you look at a continent, a people, even a community from the top down, without feeling and understanding the lived experiences of those people, all you see is patterns of deficits. And all you're capable of doing is imposing some solutions on those people that are not grounded in the aspirations and the needs of people. So data, yeah, another one of my favorite subjects. And you too talked about UNDRIP and the fact that this is a floor and not a ceiling. Yeah, I think those are the most important things. The things that I think I'm gonna that have really sort of come into my heart and my mind, and the things that I would like to carry forward from this learning, from this teaching. And I want to encourage everybody who's watching this webinar right now to do the same thing. You don't have to repeat verbatim this knowledge. You don't have to reproduce it, but feel it. The parts that come into your heart are the parts that you need to hear, things that you need to hear. And those are the messages that you have the responsibility to take forward. And in doing so, I hope everyone in some way can speak with the voices of ancestors of the thousands of years, the layers and layers of knowledge that we all carry in our genetic memories, because we all, at some point in time, were Indigenous people.
Wow, thank you, Angela. That was such a beautiful reflection back of what we heard today. Thank you for being such a powerful witness. We did have one question from someone who wanted to know who the quote was that you were talking about just at the top about witnessing. Do you have the name of that person? Oh, you're muted, sorry. You were muted there. Anyway.
Sorry, you're doing it again. Okay, so the author is Stephen Kopty, and it's an article called Indigenous Self-Discovery, Being Called to Witness. And It's in a journal called First People's Child and Family Review.
Okay, that was wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I know we have some questions that some of the participants had asked. So what we'll do is we'll try to get to those after the webinar, and we'll share those out somehow with the group. But I just want to say a huge thank you for those who are participating and bearing witness and engaging with our incredible speakers today. We'd like you to think about, oh, there's a there's a poll you can participate in, and also just think about how your work and your studies are benefiting the Indigenous territories where you currently reside, and what role can you play to benefit and support Indigenous communities in your region. I want to extend a deep gratitude again to our really great speakers. And again, I know I feel like we sort of rushed you, but I think your points were made very powerfully, and yeah, I have lots to think about, take away. So thank you so much to Dawn Morrison and Alana Young and Wilson Mendez. And then of course to our witness, Angela McIntyre. It was really wonderful. I also want to thank those who worked behind the scenes to make this webinar happen. Jessica Lattis, Melanie Cooksdorf, Kate Hodgson, Michael Saloom, who was controlling the slides beautifully, and Anisha Sandhu. Finally, I just want to invite you to join us in 2 weeks' time for our third episode in this webinar series. And that one will be titled A Food System in Crisis, Climate Change, COVID-19, and Opportunities for Change. That will be on June 25th at 3 p.m. And you can find out more if you go to our website at ubcfarm.ubc.ca. And finally, we'd love to know what you thought about this webinar. We will be sending out a short survey after the session, and we would really love to get your feedback on this, because this is something that's new for us, and we're trying to learn each time as we go and tweak a little bit. And if these are well received, as they seem to have been so far, we'd love to be able to offer more. So thank you again so much for joining us, and appreciate all of you for hanging in there a little bit over time, and look forward to more of these really rich discussions with you, continuing the conversation. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.